Our training today is brought to you by our partners over at City of Glendale. And today we're so happy to be joined by Sevek Deshoyan, Economic Development Coordinator, who's here to share more about the resources available to employers like yourself. Hi, Sev. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you on behalf of City of Glendale's Economic Development Division for joining us today. We're very excited to be working with California Employers Association to bring you webinars like this, ongoing webinars every quarter. In case this is your first time joining a webinar like this, I wanted to take just a quick minute before we get into the main topic to talk about what we do here at Economic Development and how we can help either start or grow your business in Glendale. So really we have three main goals: business attraction, business retention, and business expansion. And the way we tackle those three is through our economic development services. So services such as finding the ideal space for your business, or as we call it, site selection assistance. And the way we would tackle it is through our different parameters that are available for the property spec. So you can just let us know the ideal size, the place, the amenities, the specific things that you're looking for the property, and we would connect you to the appropriate brokers and schedule site visits. Facilitation of business resources is another service we offer. This is for connecting you to both internal and external resources. So, when it comes to permitting, engineering, Glendale Water Power, whatever your project needs, we will connect you to the appropriate folks. And on the external end, it would be more state and federal level. So finding funding opportunities, forming your business, and much more. Marketing and social media assistance is something we place a very big emphasis for the local businesses or businesses that are coming soon, especially. And the way we would do it is promoting it on our different media channels and newsletter. And the one that's super connected to today's topic and the one you see on the screen is our dedicated HR hotline that's not available in many cities. So for this one, you can just give them a phone call Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and get all of your HR related questions answered, from basic things such as what the minimum wage is, all the way to industry specific questions. To access any of the services I mentioned earlier, you can just connect with me directly. I'll go ahead and leave my information in chat right after this, or you can just contact our division, and one of our lovely coordinators will go ahead and assist you with all of the issues, concerns, or any kind of questions that you have. With all this being said, I will keep my portion short and pass the mic back to Anna to introduce our wonderful speakers. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sev, for everything you and Jennifer and your entire team do for employers in your city and beyond. So now I'd love to introduce our trainers today. We have Eli Nunez and Astrid Servin, two of our amazing HR directors who you may have had the pleasure of working with if you called into that complimentary HR hotline. So you're in great hands, and I'm going to hand it over to Eli.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for the City of Glendale. We really appreciate that partnership, and we look forward to helping you with any questions that come up, whether it's regarding this webinar or anything else that you're dealing with regarding human resources. A little bit more about us. We are California Employers Association. If you're not familiar with us, our goal is to provide employers with peace of mind. So anytime you call us on that hotline or you log on to one of our webinars or use any of our other services, we try to do whatever we can to really help out with the HR portion of your job. I mean, we know HR is really complicated, especially in California, so we try to make that as easy for you as possible. And we like to say that as you can see, we keep the human resources. So we know that, at the end of the day, we're dealing with people and people problems, sometimes require talking things out. So that's what we're here for, provide you resources and sometimes provide you just an ear to bend if you need to run something past us. With that, though, I would like to add, especially as it relates to this presentation, that we are not lawyers, and even though we do have people on our team with legal training, we do not provide legal advice. So this training is of an educational nature. We'll talk about some of the changes that are occurring, possibly some laws that are in place or coming into place, but we will not provide legal advice. So if you have any questions of a legal nature, we do always recommend that you consult with legal counsel so they can better advise you in those matters. So with that, let's talk about some of the topics we'll be covering in today's labor law update. We're going to talk about minimum wage increases, and this has been on the news lately a lot, so we'll talk a little bit about what that means. We'll talk about some updates to OBA. That's the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but we call it OBA for short. Talk about artificial intelligence. It's all over the news and it's all over the place, really. So we'll talk about, some what's going on there and how it could affect your business and some things that we recommend that you do. Annual notice and training obligations, of course, what you should be handing out to your employees and what trainings they should be going through. Developments on a federal level. There's, as you know, that there's federal law and state law, and they're both quite important, as you can imagine. So we'll talk about some things that are going on the federal side of things and how they affect us here in California, as well as discussing some new case law. So when it comes to how law impacts us as business owners or as really citizens here in the Golden State, it's a couple of ways that could take place. One, it's a law that could be passed, and the other way is the way a court interprets those laws and puts it in place. So we'll talk about some interesting court cases Astrid will present to you, and kind of what they mean or what direction they steer things in. So to start, let's jump right into wage and hour, though. We'll get right into the nitty gritty, if you will. We'll talk about some local minimum wage increases going on throughout the state. Healthcare minimum wage increases too, as some of you know, healthcare does have a different minimum wage than the state minimum wage. So we'll talk about when that increased and how much. An increase to the IRS mileage. So if there's any of you that pay your employees mileage for using their personal vehicles for business purposes, that rate did increase. We'll talk about how much. And as I mentioned, we'll talk about OBA, how it relates to tips and overtime deductions, which are really the big selling points of it, or the big publicized points when it came into place last year. So we'll talk about what that means and how that applies to you as business owners. So to start, just a refresher, I mean, minimum wage did go up at the beginning of this year. As of January 1st, it went up to $16.90. And that did have a ripple effect where it does affect those exempt or salaried employees. So the law says in the state of California, in order for an employee to be exempt, they have to meet both the duties requirement as well as make 2 times the hourly minimum wage. So if you double that minimum wage, multiply it by 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, you come up with that $70,304 number. So if you have exempt employees, they should be making at least that much in their salary. Now, news just broke, I believe it was earlier this week, late last week, that there will be an increase for 2027. So as of January 1st, right now, the governor is projecting that the minimum wage will be $17.40. That's in January 1st, 2027. And of course, that is going to ripple over to that exempt salary. So if you have any exempt employees making $70,304 right now, as of January 1st of next year, to maintain their exemption, they will have to be earning $72,384 per year. So, it's a little early. We usually, this news usually doesn't break until September, October sometimes. We got early notice of it this year from the governor, which is great because it gives us a chance to prepare for it, budget, or make any adjustments to how people are classified, whether they're exempt or non-exempt, so we can, adjust for that coming change next year. Just a reminder too, fast food minimum wage is still at $20 per hour. And that one again also affects those exempt fast food employees to the tune that they have to earn $83,200 an hour to maintain their exemption. So if you have the owner of a franchise and you have a manager that you pay on salary, then we will see that they should be making $83,200 per hour. Now, I did mention two local minimum wages throughout the state. That means that different cities or counties may have higher minimum wages than the state of California. And this poses an interesting situation, which you see in this scenario. In this one, if you have a company that is headquartered in Stockton, California, that follows a state minimum wage on $16.90, but in one week, you have a non-exempt employee that works 3 days in Stockton and spends 2 working days at a conference in Oakland, which has a higher minimum wage of $17.34 per week. The question comes up, how do you pay that employee if he worked 2 days in the city that follows the state minimum wage and then 3 days on one that has a higher minimum wage? So what is owed to that employee? I'd like to see what you think about that, and let me pull up a poll for that to get your thoughts on that. So how should we pay that employee? Can we pay them $16.90 per hour for the whole week because we're headquartered in Stockton and that's the minimum wage they follow? Do we pay them $17.34 for the whole week because that's the highest rate? Or do we pay him $16.90 for the work performed in Stockton and $17.34 for the work performed in Oakland that has a higher minimum wage? So I'll give everybody just a sec to respond to that. And let's see, saw a question come up in the chat, I believe. Oh, Astrid got it. Thank you very much. Yes, that increase of $17.40 for the statewide minimum wage has been confirmed, so that will be effective on January 1st, 2027. Again, hate to be the bearer of bad news for business owners, but as some of you may recall from past presentations, the minimum wage in California is tied to inflation and the cost of living, and as that goes up, then the minimum wage is automatically increased. So let's see, we got answers still coming in here. And we'll go ahead and end the poll right now so we can keep moving. So it looks like the majority of you did say that we are going to pay $16.90 for the work performed in Stockton and $17.34 for the work performed in Oakland. And that is the correct answer. Now, a couple of you said that maybe we pay $17.34 for the whole week because it's the highest rate, and that would be the safe approach, but it's not necessary. So in the state of California, you do have to pay whatever the minimum wage is where the work is performed. So in this case, since the conference took place at a city with a higher minimum wage, then that is what is owed to the employee for the work performed there or for the hours spent at that conference. So C is the correct answer in this one. Thank you very much all for the participation. And this does have an effect on employers because if you have a business where you have employees that travel to different cities, I always give the example of landscaping. If you have a landscape company, you send your employees to another city, you have to be aware of what the minimum wage is over there because that's what your employees have to earn while they perform work there. It also applies if you have remote employees that work from home. You have to be aware of what the minimum wage is, if they're at minimum wage, where they are performing the work, in other words, where they live or where their home office is, as well as any other protections such as additional paid sick leave restrictions or requirements, or possibly any kind of different caps on sick leave or that sort of thing. So again, as a last count, there was over 40 local ordinances that went above and beyond what the state requires. So it's important to be aware of those, especially if you have remote employees, or if you have employees that travel to other cities or other counties. And we did put together a handy spreadsheet, a handy fact sheet with that has all the different minimum wages and information and requirements throughout the state, which you can access through that bit.ly link there on the page. Now, the thing about a lot of these local higher minimum wages is they usually have a mid-year increase as well, and this year was not an exception. We did see a July 1st increase in a lot of these cities. Ones that come to mind, of course, up here in Northern California, you have, the Silicon Valley, you have Alameda, Berkeley, Emeryville, Fremont, Milpitas, San Francisco, the city of San Francisco, that is. Southern California, the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, Malibu, Pasadena, and Santa Monica all had July 1st local increases as well. And there was some related to specific industries. So for the hotel industry in Glendale, the city of Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Long Beach, West Hollywood, and even the city of San Diego, there's a new one. There were some increases for certain applicable hotel industry workers there as far as minimum wage goes. The San Diego one went a little further too because it covered event centers, amusement parks, and that sort of thing. So I know you being the city of Glendale, if you have anybody or if you're in the hotel industry, good to be aware of that. And of course, that information is also available on that minimum wage spreadsheet that we put together as well. So covered facilities for hotels usually include, your larger hotels, 150 guests or more, that sort of thing. But again, these vary by different municipalities or different cities, so make sure you are aware of what your local one is. Not only did we see those increases throughout the different cities or different counties in the state, as well as the hotel industry, but the healthcare minimum wage is also different in the state of California, and we did see some increases mid-year as well. Now, just a reminder, the healthcare minimum wage came into effect on October of 2024, and the goal was to have everybody in the healthcare industry or applicable healthcare industry at $25 an hour, but rather than make just one big jarring increase, they decided to phase it in different steps. So it's going to be a gradual increase. Now, this applies to most healthcare facilities, hospitals, residential settings, physician groups, that sort of thing. But again, it doesn't apply to everybody at the same level. So it's more of a gradual approach to where maybe some of the smaller facilities have more time to get up to that $25 range. Now, and currently we have the different ranges for minimum wage for healthcare in California range anywhere from $19.28 up to $25 per hour. And of course, since the minimum hourly minimum wage is higher, that also means that the exempt minimum wage is higher. So there's a different calculation to see what your exempt employees should be making in the healthcare industry. It's going to be either the higher of 2 times the state minimum wage or 1.5 times your applicable hourly minimum wage, depending on the facility. So again, if you're not sure if this applies here or how it applies here or where you fall into, give us a call on the hotline. We could talk through the scenarios to see, where you land or try to determine where you land and kind of what minimum wage applies to you at that point. All right, now I also did mention that the personal vehicle usage amount that the IRS mandates actually increased in mid-year this year as well. Usually the IRS doesn't increase that mileage rate until the end of the year, but they surprised us this year. They said as of July 1st, that went up from $72.50 per mile up to 76 cents per mile. Obviously, we could assume that the increases in cost of living, cost of fuel, that sort of thing played a role in this. So again, if you have employees that drive their personal vehicles on company business, make sure that you are reimbursing them either at the IRS established rate or possibly higher. Now, as an employer, you can pay less than that IRS mandated rate. However, the burden of proof is on you to prove that what you are paying your employees at lower rate is enough to cover all of their costs, which can get very complicated. So unless you're very good with accounting or you have a very good accountant, the safe bet may be just to go with that IRS established minimum wage, or I'm sorry, that IRS established personal vehicle usage mileage rate. And just as a reminder too, if you have non-exempt or hourly employees that drive their vehicles on company business, make sure that you're also paying them for their time worked on top of the mileage reimbursement. The mileage reimbursement really only covers things like fuel, wear and tear, insurance, that sort of thing. It doesn't apply to the hours worked for the employee. All right, moving on. I did mention we are going to talk about OBA. And the thing that was really publicized or was really tossed around a lot about OBA was the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. And really, when those words first came out, the impression was that people were going to see a lot bigger paychecks, right? Because their overtime wasn't going to get taxed, their tips weren't going to get taxed. And that's not exactly how it works. So it's not something where we don't tax the paycheck. It's something where the employee can actually take a deduction for their federal income tax on any qualified tips and qualified overtimes. And now this is not an indefinite savings or indefinite deduction, if you will. OBA basically only established this from the tax years 2025 through 2028. So these tax breaks or tax deductions, as you will, whatever you want to call them, actually expire after 2028 tax year. So what's important for us to know as employers is that we have to report any qualified tips and qualified overtime on the employee's W-2s. Now, since this took place, partway through the year 2025, we got a lot of questions last year. What do I have to do? Do I have to report it? That sort of thing. And the IRS did extend some grace for the year 2025 because it took place mid-year and employers weren't ready to report that sort of thing at the end of the year. But for this current tax year 2026, we have to make sure that we are reporting all the qualified tips and qualified overtime to employees at the end of the year. They're on their W-2 or a separate document so they can apply for that deduction when they file their taxes. Now, a little more on the qualified tips. The IRS did establish a list of around 70 or over 70 different occupations that qualify for this qualified tips deduction. Everything from beverage and food service, entertainment, hospitality, home services, personal services, all the way to transportation delivery. It's easy for an employee to say, hey, the client gave me a tip, so I'm going to take a deduction on it. In order for it to be a qualified deduction, you have to make sure that your occupation is on that list. You can go on the IRS website, get that information to see if it applies to you. And just a reminder, in order for something to qualify as a tip, it has to be given voluntarily by a customer. So things like automatic service charges do not apply because those are basically mandatory for the customer to pay. They don't have the option of paying it or not. And again, I mean, that deduction is only available for tips that are reported on, as of this year, the Form W-2, 1099, or Form 4137 by the worker. So in other words, those tips have to be reported. As a tipped worker, I can't just pull a number out of the air and say, I got tipped this much last year, I think, and that's what I'm going to take the deduction for. It has to be something that's reported on our work documentation. Now, as far as overtime, it is also not as simple as, as it sounds, of course, because as you know, OBA is a federal law, not a state law. And California does things a little differently. So in California, overtime is paid for any hours over 8 hours in the day or $40 in the work week, whereas the federal government only recognizes overtime as anything over 40 hours in the work week. So in order for the overtime to qualify for that deduction, it has to be that overtime that is beyond the 40 hours in the work week. So um, kind of puts us in a conundrum if you're doing in-house payroll here in California. You have to track the overtime and see which type of overtime it is so you can report at the end of the year. In other words, is it overtime that's beyond 8 hours a day? And or is it overtime that's beyond 40 hours for the week? Because not both types may necessarily qualify for that deduction, for that tax deduction. So their thing is when we talk about no tax on overtime, it's not doesn't apply to the whole amount. In other words, if I'm making $20 an hour and I come in from overtime and I'm paid $30 an hour, it doesn't apply to that full 30 hours. It only applies to the half portion of time and a half. So it would only apply to, in that example, the $10 portion would be the one where I could take the deduction on, not the full, time and a half amount. So again, makes it a little complicated for employers and really leaves it up to us to explain to the employee, how that applies to them. And again, things like double time that we pay in California, not necessarily the same as the federal law, so the deduction would be a little different on that as well. Another development we did see here in the state was that there was a ruling as far as meal and rest breaks for some commercial drivers in the state of California. So those of you that have commercial drivers that are under federal transportation rules know that their hours of service and that sort of thing are basically governed by federal law, right? So meal and rest breaks may not necessarily apply to them, or California's meal and rest break requirements may not necessarily apply to them. Well, the Ninth Circuit Court in a way extended this to passenger carrying commercial motor vehicles that fall under the Federal Motors FMCSA's hours of service regulations. So in this case, if you have bus drivers that travel across state lines and that sort of thing and travel into California, then they are not necessarily covered by California's meal and rest break requirements. So I mean, this in and of itself can be a little confusing because again, you have commercial drivers that may be under federal law as opposed to state law, that sort of thing. So if you find yourself in that situation where you have drivers that go across state lines or do interstate commerce, um, make sure that you are following the appropriate list of regulations for them so that they are afforded the correct protections. So with that, we'll wrap up the first half here with just some reminders, some things to do for wage and hour. Big thing is, adjust the pay rates to make sure that if you're in one of these situations where you have employees that work in a municipality with a higher minimum wage or an industry with higher minimum wage, make sure that's adjusted to pay them correctly. Check for updated local postings too. A lot of these cities or counties put up like an updated, minimum wage poster that you could post as well. And make sure that your timekeeping practices correctly identify any off-site work. So if you have employees that travel to other locations, make sure you have a way of flagging that in your timekeeping system so they're paid correctly. And now when it comes to OBA, make sure that if you have employees that receive qualified tips or employees that work overtime, you are properly tracking that. Either work with your payroll person or your payroll provider if you use a company to make sure that's tracked appropriately and that is reported appropriately to the employee at the end of the year so they could take that deduction in their taxes next year. So that brings us to the end of the first half. I will stop sharing and see if there is any pending questions or anything out there with Ask
I
It.
think
Looks
you
like you
were
got all of
very,
them.
I think you were very thorough. So no, we don't have anything pending right now. Everyone's doing well. It's recording. I think it is being recorded, and I do think that at least the slideshow will be presented. So um, it will be available to all. Thank you, Eli, for getting us off there. The first part of that. Let me just get going here. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. And we'll get going. So he covered the pay portion. We have to pay our employees. Let's transfer over to another topic that's high buzz right now. This moment, lots of buzz around artificial intelligence. And that's the big talk, right? Everyone's using it. Everyone's using it at work, personal, all kinds of stuff. But there's actually not a ton of laws regulating AI in the workplace right now. I think the technology is moving faster than the policy, and that seems to be the case with AI. So we're going to go through and talk about, there is a few, especially in California. So because the laws are quiet on these issues, a lot of time these tech companies are allowed to self-regulate and do what they want. And so it is the responsibility of the employer before the laws keep up with us and start really moving through for us to be responsible employers and ensure we're doing right by our public, our clients, our employees. So we are going to talk a little bit about what is in place in California, some new case laws that are changing and moving rapidly here, and then also drafting your AI handbook policy. I'm going to ask if you all have one or not, but we're going to talk about those things because it's important to be thinking about these things, even if our laws are not there yet, because those are usually very methodical, thought out, voted on, and so it takes a while to do that. Well, while AI is moving quickly and rapidly. So let's talk about where we are in the world of AI. But before I do that, let's take a quick poll here. I just want to know from you. Um, let's see. Here it is. Does your company use AI tools to screen resumes or help select candidates? So just curious if you all are using, some of these AI tools right now for screening applicants. So when you're hiring, is that something that you're effectively doing? And then we'll talk about, because that's really where the regulations are at right now, is in this first step on the onboarding when you're first doing your selection of let's end that and I'll share the results. Looks like a lot of you are not. 80% of you are not, 10% are yes, and some of you are considering. So this is a good time to, be on because a lot of you who are not may in the future. Let's talk about where we are in the world of Civil Rights Department. So the Civil Rights Department is that agency in our state that really, this is where our discrimination laws live. This is why we do harassment prevention training. So a lot of these discrimination laws come from here. And so that department issued regulations to protect against discrimination when employers use these automated decision-making systems, which includes AI tools for making employment decisions. So you should definitely be aware of that because we want to protect our applicants and employees. Now, this is not going to apply to your independent contractors if you have them, but it does clarify employer will be responsible if you use that tool. And I'm going to tell you, most of the time we don't intentionally mean to discriminate, but maybe the settings that we have are unintentionally set up so that it only pulls from a certain amount of people. And when that happens, we unintentionally discriminate. That became effective, that law became effective October 1st of 2025, so it's fairly new. So we want to make sure that you're aware of this law that exists out there in the world so that if you're using the ADS, that you're having a human element to it, a human touch. So what are these automated decision-making systems? We call them ADS. It's any computational process that makes a decision or facilitates human decision-making through. So making through job applications, artificial intelligence, machine learning, statistics. So it's making our life easier. It's great to have these tools in place because it really helps us to make things go a little bit faster, a little bit better. So artificial intelligence, this like ChatGPT or any of these other things that we're using falls under this larger umbrella of the ADS. So if you're using resume screeners, targeted job ads, automated video interviewing scoring where it gives the score to the interviewer, some employers are doing that. All these systems need to be looked at with the human eye as well, a human element. It's not going to include things like spreadsheet software or map navigation system, web hosting. We're not including those things there yet because that's not part of the ADS model in the Civil Rights Department the way it's written. So this Fair Employment Housing Act, that's the law in California, applies when we use these AI tools to assist us when we make employment decisions. So when we're hiring, when we're promoting, selecting training programs, how we're going to select them, if we're doing comp analysis, compensation, if we're using AI tools to help us discharge employees or any other term condition of employment, anything related to employment, we really need to have a human element. Even things like computer-based tests. Some of you do quizzes or games out there, and you're keeping it fresh and fun for your employees, but we want to make sure that when it's related to job-related decisions that you're making, that we're being consistent in how we apply it to all employees. So we cannot use, also as a reminder, these tools to inquire about criminal history prior to a conditional job offer. Remember, in California, we cannot ask about your criminal history unless we've made a job offer already. And I just want to remind employers of that because that's a common one that's still being done right now where we're asking the question during an interview and taking into consideration and doing a criminal background check before we make the job offer. And it really, in California, that's illegal. We can't do that until we've made that job offer. Anything that you have, any of these records that you're holding on to as related to AI, we need to keep these for 4 years from the date of creation, or if it was as part of a personnel action that you took, then 4 years from that action, whichever comes later. So we're going to be hearing more and more about this. This is the one that's effective as of October of 2025. But let's look at a real world example of how it's already in play. So this is Mobley versus Workday. This is a case that came out. Mr. Mobley, he applied to over 100 positions out there with different companies throughout Workday's hiring platform, very similar to Indeed, but he was rejected every single time. He was over 40 years old and he actually sued Workday, claiming that their AI model systematically disadvantaged him and others in his similarly situated, over 40, disadvantaged them and other job seekers. So he sued under the Fair Employment Housing Act discrimination laws. And the lawsuit is right now, doing a collective action lawsuit, which is very similar to like a class action lawsuit. You do need to opt in. So it's actually not just Mr. Mobley. Now it's actually getting a bigger class of people who are over 40 who may have been also placed in a disadvantaged way. And so now the case involves Mr. Mobley, 4 other plaintiffs, and they're representing anyone over 40. It's one of those where you have to opt in, so people are getting notices for that. But that is something that is real. It's happening right now. And it gives us insight into the risks of using these AI tools in recruitment and making employment decisions. So still going to see how this one pans out, but it's definitely happening. People are bringing lawsuits under these new laws here. Okay, I'm going to take another poll here and you let me know what is the answer to this one. Do you have an AI policy in your employee handbook? Let me know that. So we're going to switch gears to handbooks. You may or may not know, or you may be someone who's creating policy for your business, or it might be your HR department or someone else. But let me know, do you currently have an AI policy in your handbook? Yes, no, or we're working on it. Let me know where and I think almost everyone has answered. Give it another second. All right, I'm going to stop it there. I think the most of you have answered. So it's 23% yes, 64% no, and we're working on it, 14%. So again, another good time to have this in your mind because we have these regulations and because AI is really moving fast, we should be aware. And CEA is going to recommend that you do have an AI policy moving forward. And of course, it's industry specific. There may be certain industries where it makes more sense than others. So definitely be looking at that for your workplace. But you'd be surprised how much any industry really could benefit from an AI policy. And you should be defining what is an ADS in your industry, in your company. Identify what that means for your company. You want to define that. What is allowed? Permitted and restricted business use, when you can use it, when you cannot use it, who is allowed to use it, which employees are authorized to use it. If we're allowing employees to use ChatGPT, for example, or other type of AI chat generated to do work, when can you use it? Who is allowed? Are you allowed to do it all the time? What are we putting into it? What can't go in? So you're going to want to define your sensitive personnel information. That shouldn't be put on your AI platform, shouldn't be uploaded. Pictures shouldn't be uploaded. Customer data, trade secrets, business document, all these things that employees could potentially put into an AI model, maybe you should control that and think about doing that. And then any work product, ensuring that the quality and accuracy of work, verifying information and sources, because as you all know, it's not always accurate. We have tested it a lot at CEA, and many times it is not accurate. It is pulling from a lot of information and doing the best it can, and it is really good. But many, many times it has been wrong. And so you don't want to steer people the wrong way or yourself the wrong way. So be careful with that, and ensuring that you have some sort of disclaimer there that to fact check what you're doing and the information. Great to use it as a resource, but making sure that it's accurate. If you're a CEA member, we do have a customizable AI policy available under our HR forms. If you go to employers.org, we have that policy that exists already that you can just take. You just have to personalize it for your own company. Some other helpful provisions to keep in mind cannot be used for harassment. And this came up because we already have a case on this, the Carranza versus LAPD. That co-workers were circulating a fake nude photo of an LAPD captain. This was a $4 million jury verdict. LAPD captain was awarded this because there was a nude photo that was linked to her and that was being circulated. It was not her. It was a look-alike photo. It was AI generated and it was distributed. And so there is language now as far as that being included, that is considered harassment. So distributing, viewing, or displaying any AI generated sexually explicit deep fakes, altered images that target someone's individual protected status would constitute harassment under our visual harassment policies. You may want to include Privacy and Property Act, that any work generated by AI is company property. So maybe they are using AI to create something new, and that you want to put on your AI policy that is protected, it's company policy. And we have a right to monitor those AI systems as well. And then whenever we write any policy, we want to include that EEO statement as well, that the employer's commitment to not using AI in a discriminatory manner. So making sure that we have those disclosures is always a good idea. Some AI takeaways here: familiarize yourself with how AI may already be part of HR tools of your company, how you all are using it, and ensure there is a human review of those AI processes and making sure that we're keeping those record retentions for at least those 4 years. Consider how employees may already be using AI in the workplace and your possible need for an AI policy, and ensuring you're taking these tips. And keep current, because like I said, these things are changing fast. If you subscribe to our blog, that's a great way, because we keep up with these things and we'll let you know if there's something that passes, then you'll need to alter possibly your AI policy. So monitor those legal developments in the use of AI. I'm sure if you stick with us and you do your labor law update in January, there probably will be an update to that, because there's already a Senate bill in play that may pass at the end of the year, and then we'll have more responsibilities as employers come January. So just stay tuned on this topic here. Moving on, just for the sake of time here, we're going to talk a little bit about the ongoing training obligations you all have in California. Our workplace violence prevention plan, we want to remind you of that. That came into effect around July. And so we want to make sure, since we're in that area, the summertime, that we're doing our trainings for that, because that is an annual requirement to train our employees on our workplace violence prevention plan. Ensure you have a plan in place. The template is available through our website at employers.org. It's for free. It's also available at Cal OSHA, because it's a template you can personalize. But we also have lots of training requirements that you are available for sale. So we have a toolkit. If you need help putting that together, together, ensuring that you have it in place. And then we also have even training material that you can use to train your staff. That could be found in our store. Remember, training is when you first establish the plan, and then annually. And then you also have to do it anytime there's an identifying hazard or you make a change. So for example, if you have two employees who got into an argument, a fight, and there was a disruption in the workplace, that triggers your workplace violence prevention plan, and you do need to retrain and look at that plan once again. So those requirements are ongoing, but at least annual. And then you also have your harassment prevention training. You have to do that biannually, which is once every 2 years. Remember, it's 1 hour for employees, 2 hours for management. The trainer does have to be someone who's knowledgeable in these topics, both the workplace the workplace violence prevention and the workplace harassment. The person needs to be knowledgeable in those areas. So if that's something that you need assistance with, definitely reach out to us. We do these trainings by webinar. We do these trainings by in person as well. The workplace violence prevention plan, we are sometimes limited, but because depending on your industry, if we cannot do it, then we will refer you to one of our safety partners. But these two can easily go hand in hand. Make sure that you're training your staff at hire would be the best time to really capture them. For harassment prevention, you've got to do that within 6 months of hiring or newly promoted. If you have a seasonal employee or someone who's going to be hired for less than 30 days, for example, then you have to do that within the first 100 hours worked or within the first 30 calendar days, whichever comes first. You're hiring someone for a 2-day project and they're an employee, you gotta train them within those first 2 days. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about labor law posters and notices, those posters that we put on in our break rooms. There's been some updates, so if you didn't get your updated poster, we have them available. Please, easy fix, right? You can just order a new one for 2026, or you can update what needs to be updated as well. You can just do that and wait until 2027 to get a new poster. Either one works as long as you're downloading and printing it properly, because they're very particular about the size of the sheet and all that stuff. So depending on the update. But what did get an update is our Cal OSHA safety health protection on the job in April 2026. The EEOC Know Your Rights was updated as well. And then annual notices to distribute. Remember your EITC, I'm sure you've already done this. It's sent out with your W-2s and your 1099s. Second notice in March, you probably already did that. There is another workplace Know Your Rights for California. So we have the federal one that's a poster, and then we have the California one that's a notice. And that one's fairly new. I'm sure you've distributed, but if you haven't, I want to mention it so that you also get that on your radar. It's required for all new hires. And then the DI provides a video now on this topic. So there's actually a 2-minute video that talks about the workplace Know Your Rights. They can be shown as an optional resources. It is not mandatory to show this little 2-minute video, but if you want to, you can. Your obligation is just to present that notice and get a signature that you have done that. And then there is also the survivor's right to time off, which is the crime victims, also required for new hires, but there is an annual distribution as well. So just remember these. Of course, you have all those wonderful new hire ones, but annually we have to remember to do these, which we didn't have to do annual notices prior to last year. So this is something new that we all have to kind of get used to. And you can look, like I said, if you subscribe to our blog, we keep you updated on all these things if you go to employers.org/blog. Free to subscribe. So to wrap up this section, notice and training to-dos, ensure all your postings are updated. Most use all-in-one labor law poster because it has all that. Distribute your annual notices and audit new hire paperwork to make sure that we have all these things done. And if we haven't, let's do that now. Let's make sure the quick audit really will save you time, hassle, and many fines in the future if possibly. Complete your workplace violence prevention plan annual training. Very important. I've seen it already being in use by employers. Things that have happened, clients who have come up and been very upset at our employees and have triggered this workplace violence prevention plan. So I know when it rolled out, we had a lot of grumble about it and people didn't want to do it, but actually I've seen it being used in good use here. So doing that annual training just really refreshes employees on what their responsibility are. I've seen it happen where employees are, again, a sexual harassment type of claim that will trigger this workplace violence prevention plan. So make sure that we're keeping a log. There's a lot of different responsibilities that you have under that workplace violence prevention plan. Make sure that we're not forgetting to keep up that log as events and incidents occur during your work year. And then make sure your HPT harassment prevention training is up to date for all your employees as well. Just do a quick audit of that. We have some trainings before the end of the year that will hit if you want to sign up for those with CEA. All right, our last section here, I believe, is case law and federal updates. So we're going to look at what's new, what's coming, what's on the horizon, some federal updates as they give us an indication what to be on alert for coming up for the new year. This one is another one that's kind of goes in and out of the news. We didn't hear a lot about whistleblower, and now we're hearing it more. It has always been part of your all-in-one poster. People don't realize it, but it's been there. So when an employee complains about conduct that isn't actually illegal, do whistleblower protections apply? And this is, again, out of a case, so we'll take a look at that. The answer to that is yes. Even when an employee is mistaken about the law, as long as their belief was reasonable, they may still have a whistleblower claim. So Contreras, he filed a claim for unequal pay. He felt he was a forklift operator at Green Thumb Produce, and he complained to his HR manager that his pay was lower than his coworkers or his less senior employees performing similar duties. And he demanded a raise and provided the HR manager with all this Equal Pay Act, California's Equal Pay Act, the Labor Commissioner's website, and said, look, you guys are not paying me what you're supposed to. Now, HR manager denied his request for a raise, told him he shouldn't be showing the Labor Commissioner's information to employees. And then the next day, they terminated him. They cited various insubordination information on Contreras's part. But Mr. Contreras sued Green Thumb, and he said he's suing them under the whistleblower. Like, I had a right to complain under the whistleblower. Now, he was mistaken about the scope of California's equal pay. That equal pay didn't apply to Mr. Contreras. He could be paid less than his counterparts because that law was something different. It definitely applies to equal pay, but not in the way that Mr. Contreras brought it up. And so that portion was not correct, and the HR manager was right in not paying him that. But the fact that she terminated him under the whistleblower protections was wrong. And so the courts did find in Mr. Contreras's favor because he believed that they were violating a law, and his belief was reasonable. And so the fact that they terminated him was retaliation for exercising his whistleblower. So just be mindful of this. When employees, complain to us, we get very upset. We're trying to do good by them, but let's make sure that we take a pause before we take any adverse action on an employee to ensure it doesn't give the appearance that we're retaliating. And if there is a risk that it will appear that way, we may want to take a step back and consult with counsel on things like that. Let's look at another one. This is a reasonable accommodation, which comes up quite a bit. I know Eli and I, we take phone calls, you may have called in, and almost always during our shift, we will get a reasonable accommodation question. They're difficult to manage. In this case, this is an employee who didn't disclose their disability. So let's take a look. If an employee never discloses their disability, when is it assumed that the employer has knowledge of the disability and therefore must engage in the interactive process to determine if there are reasonable accommodations available? And the answer to that is if an employer is not notified by the employee or a third party directly, they will be considered to have knowledge only if the employer observes that conduct that leaves no reasonable interpretation other than disability. So they really have to be right. And let's take a look at the details. This is Husband versus Target. Our Target stores here. Eli and I both came from Target, so we know this world pretty well. The employee was terminated for violating workplace violence policy. He had erratic behavior, including using profanity, yelling at other employees, questions about whether his supervisor had killed coworkers, and comments about inanimate objects laughing at him. Well, he had bipolar disorder, but did not inform Target until after the termination. Well, the supervisor was very concerned about mental health. He wasn't sure what was going on. He didn't know about anything. And so he was subsequently terminated. Well, in this case, Target was found that they were not liable for discrimination for failure to engage in the interactive process. So employers' observation of unusual behavior we have our workplace violence prevention plan in place, right? So we're going to follow our laws, our policy on that and be guided by that. But if we do not know about a disability and it's not known to us, then thankfully this case was a win for employers because they didn't have to guess at it. They didn't have to automatically know about his mental health issue. There was no reasonable interpretation of his behavior. So there was no way to know. So it's a great win for employers, but just be mindful, this doesn't always work that way. If we are aware that, or it's obvious, maybe they're having seizures at work or migraines, so it's visually they're pregnant, things like that, where we can, not the erratic behavior, but we can maybe tie the disability that's known that we can visually see to what's happening, then we will have a duty to engage and ask the employee, what do you need from us? And that's always a question you can ask employees when you're dealing with situations with disabilities, is not what's wrong with you, what's your disability? We shouldn't be asking that. But a better question to be asking is, what do you need from the company? Is there anything you need from us? And then document what they said. And that'll be the start of your interactive process. You're engaging with them. And that goes a long way in your documentation. We don't know what's going to happen with this employee further down the road. So that is always a good idea to start that conversation with employees and to document that. Okay, let's move on to I-9 because there's been some change to the I-9 requirements. So here's a question. We received a notice of inspection for our I-9 forms from ICE. We submitted our records, but just realized that many of our I-9 forms are missing the employee's date of birth or date of hire. We got the documentation down that they're legally here, working here, but we don't have we're missing employee's birth and the date of hire. This isn't a big deal, right? So let's take a look at this. I think I have a last poll for this one. So what type of I-9 violation would this be? These are technical violations that you will be able to correct, or B, these are substantive violations and may carry automatic fines, or these are not considered a violation as long as the individual is actually authorized to work. It won't be a big deal. Let me know what you think this is, and this is probably something outside the scope of what you normally do. But what do you think? How do you think this will be viewed by ICE when they come and audit you? So let's end that. So most of you said, 58% said technical violations, 37% substantive violations, and 5% not considered a violation. Oh, I'm not sharing this. So the correct answer is actually B. They used to be technical violations. We were able to correct them, and it maybe would not be as big a deal, I would say, if you're talking about that. But now these are now considered substantive violations by ICE and can result in automatic penalties. So that's the change that just came in March. Just 5 months ago, there's been increased penalties for simple form errors. We need to be aware of that because we need to audit our forms to make sure we're not getting in trouble. What feels like a pretty simple error can now really cost you. So let's take a look here for missing your date of birth, date of hire, failure to compute that UCIS number, that little thing, missing date in section 1, like they just forgot they signed it, but they didn't date it. Failure to print your name and title of employer or authorized rep. I know Eli and I do a lot of audits. That's a common one we see. They get the good stuff, the what they think is the meat and potatoes of the I-9, and they forget the other things, which actually now carry very substantial violations. Missing date of hire and attestation portion, failure to provide date of rehire. All these things, the violations range from 288 to 2,861 per violation. So each time, if you have multiple things here, there's per violation. So we're unable to fix that error, meaning upon notice. But so you get some time to hand over your I-9s. Make sure that you're looking at them and you're auditing them before you hand them over to ICE. You have that time that you're going to be able to do that audit. So, but before you even get there, audit those I-9 forms and your records. So to wrap up, as we're ending the hour here, audit those minimum wage and mileage increases that Eli talked about. Those increases are coming fast. Budget for that 50-cent increase coming January 1st. That's already been certified. And then make sure we're paying our hourly employees and our exempt employees. Don't forget to pay exempt employee for mileage. If they're traveling for you, we need to be paying for that wear and tear on that car, so that mileage. Ensure reporting of qualified tips and overtime. And I know that confuses employees because they think you shouldn't be taxing them. That's not what it is. So Eli summarized that perfectly there. Draft your AI policy. We really do recommend that. And then audit those that you use for those decision making and making sure that there's a human touch to that. Distribute those annual notices and conduct annual trainings, both workplace harassment and workplace violence prevention. And then audit those I-9 forms I just talked about. Very easy to do that. Make sure that we're doing that. And then monitor for any legal developments. AI is going to be a big buzz, I know. And as we end the year, there'll be some more updates. And we will have that labor law update for you probably in December or January for the city of Glendale. So, but subscribe in the meantime to our blog and stay in the know of all these laws that come fast and furious at employers so that you can keep up. And remember, you have that awesome hotline for your businesses. Tell a friend, tell a business friend in the city of Glendale about our wonderful hotline. And Eli and I are happy to hear from you then. And then I'm going to throw it back to you, Anna, to wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Eli. Thank you, Astrid. That was so much information in less than an hour. I don't know how you do it and still manage to make it so comprehensive and clear, but this is why you are the HR experts. So, as Astrid mentioned, we do have that complimentary HR hotline provided by City of Glendale for all employers in that area. But if you find that you need a little bit more, here is a little bit more about our different levels of membership. We encourage you to check that out over at employers.org. You can always reach out via live chat or call into that hotline if you need some more information and what might be appropriate for your organization. As I mentioned at the beginning, the way that we continue to serve you is by hearing directly from you. So I just dropped a link into the chat, as well as you can scan the QR code there on the slide. You can choose your own adventure, but we hope that you will take a minute to share some feedback with us. And then if you are joining us for continuing education credits, those are going to the chat now, as well as you see them on your screen. So your HRCI code 747738. Your SHRM code is 26-NJEWD. If you run into any trouble or you don't know quite what to do with those codes, and you are eligible for certification or recertification, you can always reach out to us, ceainfo@employers.org, or again, call into that hotline and we'll get you to the appropriate person to help. I think that wraps it up. So thank you again to Eli. Thank you, Astrid, for managing all of those really insightful questions. And thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. Thank you all for taking time out of your lunch hour to spend training with us. And thank you, Sevek and Jennifer, for all that you and your team do for employers in the Glendale city. With that, look for an email from our team with the link to, the PDF file, with the copy of the slide deck today. And we look forward to working with you again and talking to you on that HR hotline. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.